There's been a conspicuous absence in this campaign, and that is much talk at all about the substantive issues in the economy from both parties.
It has, because I think a lot of the polls have shown that really what people are worried about are things like the cost of living. So it's been very kind of near-term focus and very short-term focus.
And so what is the economic situation that a national enact, perhaps New Zealand First Government, inherits?
Yeah, look, it's very much a mixed bag, right? So we've got people feeling really grumpy. So consumer confidence, business confidence is pretty low, but the economy is still chugging on, right? We've still got more jobs, we've got more businesses being started. So it feels like we're on the cusp of a slowdown, but not yet. So they're inheriting, I think, sort of dark clouds, but starting from as good a position as possible with low unemployment, lots of businesses, all kind of wondering what's going to happen next.
And in terms of people's personal situation, New Zealand voters' personal situation, it's sort of in a strange holding pattern too, isn't it? We're still suffering with high inflation rates, but the job market's pretty secure.
It is, and so what we've seen is, spending has come off a little bit because costs have gone up, but people still have jobs and incomes are increasing. So it's just kind of this weird holding pattern. And I think people are sort of hoping that somehow they're going to get this relief because of a change of government, but that's not what happens, right? The cost of living is really affected by what's happening globally because of the synchronized global inflation shock and what the Reserve Bank does. And the Reserve Bank is going to keep interest rates high for longer. That means we're going to be hurting for a lot longer.
What do you think will happen with the Reserve Bank? Because Nicola Willis has been critical, let's say.
Well, I would expect Nicola to be quite constructive in terms of working with the Reserve Bank because that appointment is quite independent and it should be that way. We want the Reserve Bank to be independent and strong because it needs to run independent, credible monetary policy. And so far the Reserve Bank has tried to do that. We can be critical of its decisions, but the reality is it's done it as independent as possible. I expect the Reserve Bank will maintain interest rates where they are for quite some time because they're not confident that inflation is going to come off soon enough.
And what about the housing market? What are we looking at there?
Well, it's a twofold thing, right? So on the interest rate side, it's expensive, so it's going to be hard for people to borrow money and it's going to be expensive to borrow money. But on the other side, we'd probably expect with the change of government and the new policies that we have seen, that we're going to see an increase in demand at the margin, both from the reduction of, I guess, all those pressures on investors in particular, but also in terms of the return of foreign buyers, it's possible that's going to increase demand. But also the National Party moving away from some of the housing supply rules means that we're going to be building less houses. So we're probably going to see house prices going up.
Okay, and what about migration is another interesting element that this government inherits, record migration.
It is, and migration is double-edged, right? It's great that we can fill vacancies and the economy looks good, but the fact is we don't have enough roads, houses, doctors, nurses, and all those other bits and pieces. So it's a headache for all governments, and I think migration is always a double-edged sword. For me, the big concern is really that we're losing so many New Zealanders. Yes, we can fill it in with workers coming in, but New Zealanders are still voting with their feet and saying things are better elsewhere.
Well, National has campaigned, on tax cuts and this foreign buyers tax plan. But what impact what impact do you think that we will see in the economy from these policies and from what you know about, what they're planning?
Yeah, look, I think it's the impact on the people who are affected versus the net effect on the economy as a whole. So there'll be some groups that will, of course, be better off. Those people who are going to get the biggest tax cuts will have more money in their bank account. There'll be parts of the economy, like our real estate friends, who'll be feeling quite chipper this morning. But in a net, if you look across the economy, we have three levers of driving the economy. One is monetary policy, that doesn't change. Fiscal policy, National has promised they're going to be fiscally neutral. That means there is no additional new money in the economy. So that doesn't change. It's going to be around those big structural policies. Is there a big net effect? We can't see it yet.
And that will take some time, presumably, to move those levers for that to be felt in the economy as well.
Absolutely. And we also haven't had the substantive talk about those kinds of issues. We've not really talked about unsexy things like competition, right? Or demographics. Productivity. So we kind of throw these lines out as big things, but then when you're in power, it's actually really hard to do. How many times have you seen governments in opposition say, or politicians in opposition say, oh, it's terrible, we have a productivity problem. And then once they're in power, we kind of stop talking about it because it's really hard.
And this is an ongoing problem, for successive governments and over successive decades, actually. But we haven't seen much from National about how they would attack or how even if they can attack that.
Yeah, and I think, what we heard from from David from ACT this morning was, are we going to have targets for public service? Well, that's fine, but how are you going to drive the engine of the New Zealand economy? You know, one is about Wellington City and the other one is about all of New Zealand. And it's not clear to me that we have had those discussions. Neither have we talked about demographics, our aging population. We haven't really talked about climate change. You know, we've had two big major events. We're kind of hoping that we're going to have ad hoc responses to that and we're going to bail people out. That's not sustainable. That's stupid, right? I mean, we've got to have constructive long-term policies that are on the back of emergencies.
Yeah, and we still seem to be reacting to these climate emergencies like they are one-off events, but they're not, are they? It's not realistic for us to, for the government to be the backup insurer for every house in New Zealand that is at risk.
Especially with where our fiscal situation is, right? We don't have a lot of fiscal headroom. Every time there's a crisis, we borrow money and we try and deal with it that way. But you can't keep doing it. At some point in time, you do run out of room, especially when your population is aging and most of our taxes are paid by young people. So there's a real trick there. But also, we know the market will force it. We know that insurance is getting more expensive and insurance is retreating. So what's going to happen? And we need to be much more aggressive and in front of it to be able to do that. So, you know, this government is going to inherit an economy that I think is a bit of a mixed bag. I think there are some challenges. But really, the big levers that I really want to see them focus on is those big structural policies. In the fiscal policy, that's really a red herring. Monetary policy is not their business. It is structural economic policies. That's where their big job is. And I want to see what that plan is, because so far we haven't seen it.
Well, we might not have to wait too much longer. Shamabile Yaqub, thank you so much for joining us here on The Nation this morning.
Thank you.